Afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are located right now. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Adam Thompson. I am one of the ESCALATE subject matter experts supporting the ESCALATE project. I am a person with HIV and a coach and a consultant working a lot with the Ryan White program. I'm joined today by one of our colleagues, Wendy Taylor from Waikiki Health, who'll have an opportunity to introduce in just a moment when we move to hear a little bit more about how Waikiki Health has been reviewing their policies. What we'd like to do today is review some strategies and some approaches and tools and resources to support agencies engaged in the ESCALATE project to review their policies through an equity lens. Next slide. So just to level set very quickly, what is a policy? A policy is nothing more than a law, a regulation, a procedure, an administrative action, incentive, or voluntary practice of government or other institutions. Policies generally operate at the systems level, meaning they can influence complex systems in some really unique ways that can improve both the health and safety of a population. The reason we think it's so cool here at ESCALATE is that a policy approach is actually a super cost-effective way to create a lot of positive change in an organization in a large portion of the population. Policy really serves to frame a lot of our programs and our efforts. So if we have a bad frame, it can end up affecting our programs and our behaviors and our sort of culture downstream. Next slide. So when I think about policy review, I actually like to put the word evaluation on it because I think that's a little bit more descriptive of what we're doing when we look at policy. We're trying to evaluate. Is it good? Is it bad? All policy have implications. What we want to know is what are the intended ones and are we getting them? And what are the unintended ones and are they happening? So when we go to evaluate a policy, here are some broad steps that folks should think about when sort of organizing themselves. First and foremost, identify a policy evaluation champion, someone who is going to hold the process. Second, formulate the purpose and scope of the policy evaluation so we don't have scope creep or be reviewing and revising policy for the rest of our lives. You want to convene a policy evaluation team that really reflects the variety of stakeholders that need to be present to have a say in the policy that affects their lives. Then you conduct the policy evaluation, which we're going to focus on a lot today, looking at the tools and the process of our colleagues and peers. Then you revise your policy. You disseminate that policy, often with hopefully some robust training and support. And if you're me, a lovely process map. And then you monitor that policy implementation to make sure that it's going out the door in the way you intended. And then thinking about sustaining the policy over time, which would include whatever quality assurance you may put into place to make sure that the good idea we had 10 years ago is still a good idea today. Next slide. So when you begin, most projects, I recommend folks to begin by asking, I think, a really critical question: what are you trying to accomplish? Is the team trying to create a new policy, or are you trying to review an existing policy? Are you like really going for the moonshot here and you're going to review all the policies in your organization? Or are you maybe sitting inside a jurisdiction where you may not be able to change the policies of the people you fund, but maybe you're thinking about creating a process or a tool or a resource that could be disseminated to others in your network so that they could be more effective in their policy evaluation. Next slide. So when thinking about scope, there's sort of these three big buckets associated with policy that folks can dig into and kind of look for the value when doing this kind of work. First relates to content. Content evaluation are things like reviewing the policies for whether the problems were appropriately defined, whether other policies out there are doing something different or better, and looking at the process for how the policy was developed. When folks go to do content evaluation, it could be something like reviewing your existing policies for appropriate sexual orientation and gender identity or SOGI data elements and combing through the mechanisms and saying, okay, where are all of the places and spaces inside our policy where the content is stigmatizing or inappropriate or is really creating an environment or culture that doesn't reflect who we say we are? But beyond content, you can also look at implementation, which is maybe we think the content's great, but when we tried to roll it out, folks were like, yeah, that's awesome, but no, I'm not going to do that, right? So somehow in our implementation of our good idea, maybe it didn't work. So reviewing this could be looking at that strategy, right? How did we train people? Was there updates? Did we do it at every site? Or was this a webinar with 600 staff members where we said, don't be racist, right? Like how this happens in an environment can really affect the effectiveness of your policy change. And then lastly, a lot of folks, I think, start with impact. They sort of feel or know either through their quantitative or qualitative data that there are communities of folks who experience disparities that we trace back to the way we think and work, which is often rooted in policy. When folks want to look at impact, that is a data place, right? You need to collect not only quantitative data about the health indicators, but really thinking more, I think, even so, about the qualitative data, which is often where we find the unintended consequences of a policy. The implications fall in people's lives, and to collect that, we have to share story and listen to story and be able to translate story into an understanding of how those harms were sort of created in the community space as a result of our institutional policy. Next slide. So when thinking about a method to use, first of all, we want to make sure folks know, one, there are methods. Hooray. There are big frames out there that people can look at that will help you either do a comprehensive policy review by looking at all three aspects of content, implementation, or impact. But there are also tools that specifically look at evaluating content or implementation or impact as a single aspect of the policy. Agencies can actually save a lot of time and staff effort by really reviewing what's out there, seeing what folks have done, and then adapting or adopting those tools or strategies in your setting so that your policy review team is sort of ready to hit the ground running with a process that has been tested by others and shown to be effective. Next slide. So I love a good process map, and I apologize that our animations are not as accessible in this graphic. So what I'd like to do is describe the process of trying to decide what tool or resource you need. We will begin in the upper left hand of the process map where there is a graphic of start, right? The first question moving right across the screen that I often ask myself is, do I know what I'm doing? If I don't know what I'm doing, I need to go find myself foundational tools or resources, things that are going to explain the process to me at a conceptual level so that I have an understanding of not just the steps of what to do, but really an understanding of the theory behind why we do this. If I know what I'm doing, right, the next question that I generally ask is, do I have a team, right? And if I don't have a team, do I want one, right? Some people are like, girl, I'm by myself in my office, right? I am the team, right? And there are tools and resources for you if you are the team. But if you decide you want a team, there are actually resources out there that can help you think strategically about who to invite to that team, what kinds of folks you may need to have in the room, and how you may need to prepare people to be a part of your policy process. So whether you have a team or not, once you make that decision, the next question I generally want to know is, are you trying to evaluate some kind of specific content? And if the answer is yes, is that content specific to a community? Because often, if it is, those communities have developed tools and resources that you can go to and see how they say you should guide this process. People with lived experience in the community are a tool and a resource. So don't think and ignore the staff that are present inside of your organization. As we increase representativeness and we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring, part of the reason, right, we said we wanted diversity in our staff is so that when we have these kinds of things on the table, we have people inside our house that can help us out here, right? So think about both internal and external stakeholders as tools and resources as well. If it's not on a like community, then I want to know, oh, so is it topical? Like maybe we're not looking at, young gay men, maybe we're looking at racism, right, at an ism level. There are topical tools and resources about that too, right? So whether it's a community or sort of a topic or an ism, you want to kind of look for the things that align there. If you get to that and you say you're doing content, but it's not people and it's not a topic, then I think you have to ask yourself, do we know what we're doing here? And if you don't, let's go back to the beginning on start, and we'll go back to our foundation of tools and resources to go, what are we trying to do here? So let's say it's not content, and let's bring our eyes back to the right and about the middle of our process map. And let's say it's not evaluating content. We ask ourselves, is it evaluating process? because there are tools and resources out there that can help you look at how a policy was developed, or if you're trying to develop a new one, what process might you implement in your organization to sort of bring about the outcome of a new or revised policy environment. If you're not evaluating process, then I would ask, are you evaluating impact, right? So like, are there implications here that we're not seeing, or maybe the policy isn't producing the results? And that's where I think you've got to dig into your data, right? That's going to show you. We have some pretty solid information there. Also remembering that data are not just numbers, right? Data are in the narratives of the community and the people that you serve. Thinking not only about the people that walk through the doors, but often impact of policy can be felt by the people who choose not to walk through your doors. And so it's really important when thinking about impact evaluation that it's often data sets that may even be external to your organization to fully understand how an institutional policy is affecting the community. If at the end of that process, and you say you're not doing content, and you're not doing process, and you're not doing impact, then our little red line takes us back up to the beginning again of maybe we don't know what we're doing here. And so then we go back to our foundational tools and resources. The reason this process is important is because there are so many tools and resources out there that you could really get lost in them. And so trying to choose between them gets a little bit easier when you can refine your search by what approach you're trying to take. Next slide. What I'd like to do now is just walk you through some examples of tools and resources that fall into each of these categories. Tools and resources for foundational and conceptual knowledge, tools for topical or population-based analysis, or tools that look at infrastructure or the process itself. Next slide. So this first resource, this is a resource for foundational concepts. It should be no shock to anyone who hangs out with our friends at the CDC that they have a beautiful framework that has been, evaluated and tested in like every environment you can imagine. The other beautiful thing is it's very macro level. So you can go to this resource. It's specifically developed in the context of evaluating violence and injury prevention policy, but they take and lay on top of it CDC's evaluation framework and basically say, here's how you do this. It'll give you a step-by-step overview of the processes and what I think is really important, the concepts, and they are defined. And you can understand how these processes and concepts are then associated with a comprehensive policy evaluation. So how do the pieces all come together? Next slide. This is a graphic of those pieces. Their policy evaluation is really built at looking at policy development from the get-go. So if you're a person that's starting from the ground up, this tool or resource has 6 briefs actually that are a part of it that will walk you through each of these steps, right? So have I defined a good problem? What else is out there in the environment? What strategy or policy needs to be developed to respond to that? How do I enact or implement that policy? And then what does that implementation environment look like? And you can see beneath it in our graphic, we have content evaluation, implementation evaluation, and impact evaluation. Next slide. The CDC, while very good at foundational things, don't like to get very specific. So if you want to get more specific, you have to start dipping into tools and resources that are created with that specificity. They range from one-page tools, like the one depicted here, all the way to multiple pages, huge assessments that you could spend the rest of your life doing in an organization. But if you're like, I'm a one-person team and I got 6 months to pull this off and I'm trying to do something here, a tool like this one, the Equity Lens for Decision-Making, provided by the Harvard School of Public Health, is a good place to start. It promotes an equity lens that they use in planning, decision-making, and implementation, not only for policy, but for practices and programs that flow from it. It also includes a multi-dimension lens that takes the questions and brings the macro level so that if you want to get a little bit more specific, they give you a roadway to look at people, process, and place in a more granular fashion. Next slide. To give you a sense of how they ask about this, this is their racial lens, their equity lens that specifically looks at a population. And the way they do that is from a very macro level. Question 1, what are you trying to look at? Question 2 is about identifying those individuals who are your stakeholders, right? Who are the people that are getting disparities as a result of this policy, and are they at the table? How might the policy or program affect the people who are hopefully at the table to tell you how it's affecting them? how does the policy or program improve, worsen, or make no change, right? So you can kind of see this lens is already looking at an existing structure and saying, okay, how is it not doing what we want it to do? But you could see these questions, you could potentially think about using them in a prospective manner, right? Planning forward. But this is a really simple tool that you can pick up, kind of put your policy on one side of your desk, put the tool on the other side of the desk, and answer some questions and know a little bit more about the environment or landscape that you're in. So if you have the positional authority to produce these answers, but maybe not change the policy, this is a tool that can help you begin to understand how effective or not effective some of your approaches may be by asking you these very macro level questions about the process. Next slide. Then if you want to take it up a level, right, and kind of take it to our 201, 301 course here, this is a tool that's available from the Minnesota State Office of Equity and Inclusion. This is specifically built around identifying these steps that need to take place in order to do a policy review. The reason they put this out there is they wanted folks to know, the training that people need to have, as well as establishing a common language, right? What are we all talking about? So that when you're thinking about your environment, understanding that common language is really important and is like a keystone, right, of policy, that everybody understands this and we're all using the same language. It will give you very broad steps, right? So if you're looking for, tell me 1, 2, 3, 4, this can help you here, much like the CDC tool. It gives you a little bit more detail through the example of colleges and students in universities, thinking about how policy lands in that environment. But it's going to take you to a place that's a little bit more sophisticated than, let's say, the tool we previously looked at. Next slide. And this you can see in the examples here are some of the questions that are aligned with this tool. They moved into domain phases, one of the domains being equity and inclusion. And you begin looking at the questions that are associated with this domain. Will the policy protect against racial violence, racial profiling, gender inequities, and discrimination, with a follow-up question of how? This is a little deeper than our tool we were just looking at, right? It's getting more specific. There are actually 6 domains in this tool, so you're only seeing sort of 2 examples on this slide. They ask things in responsibility and accountability. What are the mechanisms in place to ensure accountability? So again, a tool that is looking at infrastructure and process, giving you a little bit more guidance, more sort of paint on the canvas, so to say, to give you a more of a roadmap than the previous tool, which is more helpful if you have a policy in front of you and it's like review, done. This one's like, hey, I want to sort of create a team and I want to kind of do this together. This is putting your feet in the baby pool and going, okay, let's just look and see what this looks like and see whether I like it. Next slide. Now, let's say you put your toes in the baby pool and you're like, man, the water is good. And you just want to dive right in. There are tools like this, the Equity and Empowerment Lens from the Multnomah County Office of Diversity and Equity. This is also an infrastructure and process tool that can help you think about building a team, establishing a team, sort of setting goals for folks, as well as creating iterative cycles to continue the review and improvement. The Equity and Empowerment Lens, I love the way they describe it, and I agree with them when you look at it. It's a transformative quality improvement tool. It takes a frame that is so solid and lands it on top of your project that unless you really tried hard to have the wrong people in the room, this tool will get you there. But it is bigger. It's a bigger process. You can see to the right here, I've got a graphic of how the tool works. There are 4 areas: people, place, process, and power. Each area has questions that are associated with it. And all you basically do is throw your policy or your problem inside the middle of that circle, and you begin asking yourself the questions in each of the domains to better understand the policy and the potential implications. Next slide. So now you want to talk about getting into the deep end. This is the Equity and Empowerment Lens logic model. It's also page 1. There are 2 pages. And so what you can do with this tool is go into this logic model, and it's actually a tool to help you understand sort of your environment that you're working in. They give you guidance on how to use the tool to kind of circle what it is you're doing, circle the things you're not doing to try to better understand where you might improve your process as far as making your policies and procedures and environment more equitable and more empowering. Also associated with this website, next slide, are tools and resources to help lay this inside the quality improvement cycle, as well as the topic that I mentioned a little bit earlier, placing your problem or your policy in the middle of the purpose circle and looking at how it lands in each of these places. And then this last document depicted here, you see in the graphics, they always have purpose centered, right? Surrounding everything. There's a lot of work in this tool around really creating a purposeful environment. So there are tools and resources around how to think about that, how to achieve that, and how to actualize that. Next slide. So when we go back to our process map, what I've done here is tried to lay on top of the map now the tools and resources that would sort of be in that category. So our foundational tools and resources, similar to our CDC tool. If looking for infrastructure or process, often you need to be looking at tools like the one from Minnesota or Multnomah. Topical or content tools can come in the form of the Harvard tool with those simple questions. And when looking at evaluating impact, they all kind of do that. So they all do it, but I also want to say at the same time, none of them do it, because they will tell you the questions to ask, but particularly in this impact section is a lot of data. So the tool and resource that you have there are your quantitative data and the stories and the narratives of the staff that work in your organization and the patients and clients that utilize your services. Next slide. So with that, what I will do is open it up for any questions or comments that folks have. People can feel free to use the chat room. And what we'll do now is I'll monitor the chat room in case questions come in. But what I'd also like to do is very excited to welcome our colleagues from Waikiki Health to talk to us a little bit about how their policy review process is going. And we are very excited to hear about it because it really does take a theory off the paper and make it real. So Wendy, Patricio, welcome.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon for everyone it's afternoon for. My name is Patricio Watani. I'm the Director of Health Equity at Waikiki Health. We are a federally qualified health center here in Honolulu, Hawaii. Just so that we give a frame of reference, we are also on the illegally occupied land of the Native Hawaiians. And so there is that framework that we have to also work within. And then I have with me my colleague, Wendy, who I will let introduce herself. I did that right as she took a sip. Hold on one second.
That's fine. Good afternoon, folks on the mainland. I am Wendy Taylor. I am a sexual orientation and gender identity health navigator with Waikiki Health, and I am the fine-tooth comber of the policies and procedures.
Excellent. Next slide, please. So in the Health Equity Department, we work under some sort of specific guidelines, and those guidelines are that the system is not made for you unless you are white, cisgendered, heterosexual, able-bodied, neurotypical, and a well-groomed man. You cannot work on stigma and oppression while also upholding the systems that put them there in the first place. And the one thing is that yes, we are upholding those systems, even if we do not recognize it. Just because you don't profit does not mean you're absolved of any problematic policies. Accountability has no hierarchy, and just because someone said something in a way you didn't want to hear it doesn't mean it's not valid. And the whole being nice thing has never actually won any wars. Next slide. So general overview, we need to look at how our organizations are governed, and that was the biggest thing. We have a lot of unwritten rules at Waikiki Health that just needed to be written down. And so this was a huge undertaking because we took on our policy and procedure review, and our policies and procedure have probably not even been looked at for about 20 years. Our agency manual is 966 pages. It is one PDF, and you have to Control F to find the policies. Next slide, please. And some of these are very old, petty, and really outdated. There are policies, for example, that we have about how we have parties for people who are leaving the organization or based on their tenure. But we do not have policies on what to do when you get into an accident in a company vehicle, or who can ride in those vehicles, as a matter of fact. Next slide, please. So this is a case study that has been ongoing recently, and the biggest thing is that there was a email sent out about we have a bathroom in one of our clinics that is for accessible use. Um, the one thing in this email, and I highlighted it, was please limit the access for the bathroom to patients who qualify. And normally this bathroom is not for employee use. If for some reason you are unable to use the appropriate bathroom upstairs, please see your supervisor. These are two really important things because one, who's qualifying the patients, and why can't employees use the bathroom? Next slide, please. So in my response, I actually went ahead and responded to this person and let them know that this is a huge issue, especially for trans and non-binary folks who may not be comfortable using communal bathrooms because there is a huge potential of violence and harassment. But in addition to that, people who are living with body dysmorphic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or things of that nature may not want to use communal bathrooms as well. And I asked her to discuss this issue. Next slide, please. And so I get this response, and it is said that we've always done it this way. It's for disabled, handicapped people. First and foremost, this language needs to be changed. We no longer use disabled or handicapped. It has actually been removed from Congress's language as well. It stated that it did not stipulate in any way you needed to ask permission to use the bathroom. It literally said that in the very last sentence. And then also some of the things we mentioned have never been an issue at Waikiki Health. I've never been hit by a bus, but there's buses everywhere all the time. So it's a potential. So next slide, please. So our project goal was threefold. We need to change the language, we need to change the culture, and we need to change the environment. Next slide, please. So first and foremost, these are our steps right now. Right now, we just finished reviewing the policies and procedure manual for stigmatizing language. So we only looked at language, we were not reviewing for content. And then we're going to go through and change the actual language in the policy and procedure manual. We're going to then review it for content and change the content as needed or add content that isn't there, these unwritten rules that are supposed to be there, like this bathroom policy that has never existed. So then we're going to roll it out department by department. And the reason we're doing this is because we know that not every policy and procedure is relevant to each department. And to be honest with you, I really do not care how dental orders their equipment. It does not affect how I work day to day. Next slide, please. So this is kind of a map of all of our departments and how we're going to roll them out. It looks like a whole mess, but I promise it makes sense to us. So what you see at the top here is our leadership, who is our C-suite and our directors, along with our boards being the first folks to be engaged in this process, including trauma-informed management training. And then we have divided it into three: medical, fiscal, and admin. And then Ohua, Makihiki, Path, CPB, or Pan Am, those are our buildings. Those are our sites that we have folks working at. And so we break it down by each individual department. As you can see, primary care, HIV care, and things of that nature. We separated out HIV care for one specific reason, and that's because Ryan White requires us to have our own policy and procedures. And so therefore, that we need to address those specifically with our HIV care team. And that includes all of our behavioral health folks, primary care, medical case managers, etc. And so we have folks in fiscal, of course, and then we have the admin as well. Anywhere you see an asterisk are a member of our stigma team that is a part of this TA process as well. And so we have a fairly large team that spans across the entirety of our organization. Next slide, please. So we need to then change the culture. Step one to doing this is explaining everything to everyone all the time. We need to make the small changes, move on to bigger. We need to review it and repeat. And we also, again, need to roll out department by department. The biggest thing here is accountability. That's a huge part of all of this, especially with culture, because if we continue to hold people accountable, we can, change the culture, basically. In Q3 of 2022, we're actually going to be hosting an accountability campaign through our employee wellness program. We are currently working on what that looks like exactly, but it will actually be where we have folks kind of rewarded for holding folks accountable. We realize that that's kind of the bare minimum, but sometimes the bare minimum is where you really need to start. Next slide, please. And then we need to change the environment. We break down the environment into 3 sections: built environment, our physical spaces, and social spaces. Our built environment, first of all, it's the law. You have to comply with the ADA and other laws that require us to have specific built environment aspects. It's also a line item on your Ryan White assessment tool, site visit assessment tool. If you're part C and D, it's requirement 8. When I do subcontract site reviews, I actually do review their site, their physical space, to make sure that there's everything that is correct, including we have signage and things like that are appropriate. Our physical spaces, the biggest thing I always ask people, have you ever been in the waiting rooms or have you ever been in the exam rooms? The answer to that is most likely yes, but have you really actually looked? Like, can you tell me what color the doors are? Or can you tell me what posters are on the wall? This is incredibly important because even with like COVID, for example, one of the biggest things that we saw was chairs were too close together. But nobody noticed this until a client said something to us. And so that was one of the things that, we need to take account of what our physical spaces are actually looking like. And yes, the colors on the doors do matter because color does matter about how people interact with a space. And then our social spaces. How is your staff interacting with clients? You would actually be shocked at the amount of positive or negative interactions people have that seem just kind of normal day-to-day stuff. It's really important that we actually pay attention to what our staff is doing, how they're saying things, what they're saying. We have a lot of incidents lately where we had some miscommunication in one of our departments, and it was just because the way that it was being explained was incorrect, but nobody caught it until it became an issue. We realize that this is hard and it really costs money, but you have to do it anyway. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
That's the last slide.
Perfect. And then that's it. That's all we have. Sorry.
Oh, apologies. That was fantastic. Thank you so much for reviewing the process. So what we'd like to do now, 2 things. One, if anybody has any questions or comments for our colleagues at Waikiki Health, please feel free to use the chat room. And what we'd like to do now is open it up for the chat room questions. And to kick us off, Patricio and Wendy, I really loved this concept of taking the unwritten rules and making them written rules. And I'm curiously, were the unwritten rules more favorable, or were they like unwritten things that were causing really bad problems? Like, is there a balance there? Are all the unwritten rules bad ones, or are there good ones too that you found that needed to just be clarified and thrown in the environment?
To be fair, any unwritten rule is bad. Like if you didn't write the rule down, then it's not actually a rule. We all know this. Like we all know that if we didn't write it down, it didn't happen. So, regardless of whether or not they're positive or negative, they're just not good. Most of our unwritten rules are weird, to be very honest with you. This bathroom policy being one of them. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But there's also an unwritten rule about who gets benefits on whether or not they can take Lyft services between sites. And, so it's those types of things where it's like people have misstepped, in these situations. And so now we're like, oh, well, there's no rule about that. And so now we have to actually write them down.
I love what you just said about that, right? Any unwritten rule is a bad rule, right? Because it's not part of our shared understanding of our work. Such a great point. Another question I had is about the challenge I see in a lot of environments is accountability to new policy. And we say, hey, we all agree that we're not going to be this way or we're not going to do this. And like half the room is like, okay, I'll do this because I get my paycheck that way. And then, over time, we kind of see people sometimes decline in their ability to, implement the behaviors or the policy as expected. Could you talk to us a little bit about the mechanisms of accountability? Has it been easy? Has it been hard? How do you all do this at Waikiki Health?
That's something we're still working on. I'm not even gonna lie. That is something that is not, it's not easy. It really isn't. And it depends, again, culturally on not only your organization, but culturally on the area you're in. I mean, like, again, we have some very antiquated ideologies here in Hawaii. I always tell people that it's 1995, but the technology is 2022 here, which is the reason I was late today because Hawaii's internet is not the greatest at all times. So, but that was the biggest thing is you're right, it's difficult. And some people are just not going to sign on to it right away, including some of our upper management staff. And so we really do have to kind of continue to push that accountability in the ways that we can with, well, we made this a rule, it's a policy, or it's been a policy for a long time and nobody just knew that. And then at the same time, like, it's the law sometimes. We have things here in Hawaii that, that most states may not, but we do have protections under the law for certain things, including gender identity and sexual orientation. And so it's the law. And the only accountability there is we could get sued.
I mean, I love that frame too. It's like, hey, this is safety for you too, right? Like if we did not have these policies in this environment, you would be doing things that you could get sued for independently, not just the organization. So let me ask a bit of a controversial question. Do folks get terminated when they like break policy, or do you think it's better to kind of have an environment of forgive many times?
It depends. It really, really depends. Yes, people have been terminated because of policy. And that's something that has happened. To be fair, I'll give you an example of we had a medical case manager who took it upon themselves to alert someone's probation officer one of our clients' probation officers who happened to be justice involved, that they had moved to Hawaii and these types of things. First and foremost, that's a violation of HIPAA because you're literally disclosing that person's health status by telling them who you are. And second of all, like, we're not police officers. It's not in our job description to do that. And so that person was immediately terminated. And the reason also was because the person also told the client to lose their number until they fixed the problem. So yes, we do hold people accountable to it. Is it consistent? Not always, to be fair. And it's something that we really do need to work on consistency, but like most organizations, we do have a lot of work to put in, which is why we're taking this TA to make sure that we're putting in that work.
See, we got a question in the chat room from Carmen down in Arizona. Hi, Carmen. Could you share examples of some of the stigmatizing language that has been found or is being updated in the policies? Did the team use a common directory of terms? Did you use your own knowledge? Would be interested in how that process was facilitated.
Sure, and I will let Wendy speak to that really quickly because she did the majority of it. But we did use, I mean, we used our own knowledge. We didn't have a common directory, but some of the language that I know of, and even within our own HR stuff, was like the use of he, she, instead of they, them, and it was just kind of these like specific gendered pronouns and stuff like that. But there was also a number of other things that had happened, and I'll let Wendy speak to that.
Yeah, so a lot of the things I found were the gendered language was the biggest, and then handicapped was a really big one that was found in a lot of places. And then regarding HIV testing. It was, positive rather than reactive. And gosh, STDs rather than STIs. Just older kind of concepts that we used to hold and that are outdated. So using a combination of my own knowledge and those of my office mates, my teammates, I brought things to them. Does this sound okay to you? It's not sitting right with me. Just kind of meeting up and talking about things because, I don't have the same lived experience as a trans person may. And so I got a lot of feedback.
That's such a great strategy to share with people. It's like you can informally like walk over to someone and go, hey, does that sound kind of garbage to you? Because it sounds a little hurtful to me, right? And then like the person who's like on the other side go, yeah, that's kind of weird. And we can
Yeah, and
change
then
it.
they're on the other side, like I could be sensitive. Like, this seems really yucky to me. And they're like, no, that's you. You're being sensitive. So
Yeah,
there's
really
both
great
sides.
point about the commonality of the language. Even in the community of people with HIV, if you want to see like a room get really hot, ask us whether we're consumers, patients, clients, people with HIV, persons living with HIV. I mean, just even amongst ourselves, I don't think we have sort of how we know, and each of us individually align with a name or an identity, and it's usually pretty purposeful why we choose that alignment. So, to kind of put the question out there, it's a little bit of a minefield, right? If you're not careful, like, wait, that was the right term. Oh, we don't say that now. Like, any recommendations or guidance for folks about, other than best strategy, bring the people who experience it into the room. Are there places or spaces that you've gone or that you have learned from that you found particularly helpful to kind of like keep the language constant or like common amongst us rather than, I'd always say like the wrong things because I'm not cool anymore.
I do in real life. But when I did the policies and procedures, I did look to the community and then I did my own research to back that up and made sure things are acceptable and things are accepted by different journals and language, our newer language, they them pronouns being singular now, when that came into play, what year everybody accepted it. Not people because that hasn't happened yet, but things like that. And then a lot of it like the STIs versus STDs, some people STDIs. And so I really kind of did my homework, just research. That's what grad school taught me. Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
I'm
and on the
currently in
other
grad school. Oh, go ahead, Patricio.
I was gonna say, on the other side of that, this wasn't just a one-person job either. Of course, we had multiple people doing this, and so everyone brought their own knowledge and brought their own, language to the table and things like that. But I absolutely agree. I think language is such a weird thing that we get really hung up on. Like, for example, the whole Latinx thing or Latine. Like, this has been an ongoing battle in our community for a long time, and I can't understand, like, people keep saying that, like, oh, only certain percentage of people use that, and I'm like, well, only certain percentage of people actually identify that way. You know what I mean? So it's like it's constantly a battle to get people to accept language first and foremost, and also to explain why that language is important. So sometimes it's just really much easier to be like, because I said so. you know. So I know that sounds terrible, but sometimes you just have to say it that way.
Yeah, it points back to the slide I think you brought up, right? Like niceness never won a war, and we have so many people in our community who die as a result of our environments and the way they feel in them. So, put it in front of people, right? Here's what's going on. So I want to kind of dive into this a little bit more about sort of the language piece of it, because I think this is where a lot of folks are like, well, where do I get my North Star? I know we've got a lot of folks in the ESCALATE cohort who are also looking at their data, right? And going, wow, do we talk about people in our data in a really stigmatizing way? I wonder, have there been any threads out of changes in the policy language that then kind of, work through the organization and change other ways? Or have you had to like purposely go into those other places and be like, here's the new policy, stop using that?
So, as it is right now, the data is our next step because, of course, our Ryan White data is really easily, um, fixable for us because that's our department. I can change whatever I want. But so coming up soon for National LGBT Health Week, Wendy has come up with an idea to do these focus groups with folks online, of course, to kind of gather data about whether or not we're doing the right thing. Because we can write all the policies in the world, but we don't actually know who's implementing them. You know what I mean? Like, we don't know that they're actually being put out there. And we would like to know what the issues are so we can inform the policies first. And then we can inform the data. But I mean, at the end of the day, like, we just have to know whether or not we're actually collecting the right data. Whether or not we're calling it the right thing doesn't even matter. Are we even collecting the right data? And that's something, because SOGI data, for example, is something that's so rarely collected or so rarely analyzed that it gets annoying to those of us in the community when they constantly are doing these needs assessments and nothing comes of it. You know what I mean? We need to stop doing that to our people, and that's a huge thing. Like, we have to, including our HIV positive folks, or people living with HIV, like, we need to stop making them research instruments and start actually implementing the things that we're finding. So, yes, I mean, ultimately, we will inform the data on that point, but first we need to make sure that we're actually making the data work.
I love an incremental step process, right? Now I'm like, oh, there's a process map for this. I know it. So let me ask another question. Kind of might be obvious, but I'm always curious. Has this cost you all anything? Like, besides the staff time to kind of do the work, are there costs associated with like reprinting policy or like making a new manual, or has it been pretty much like a cost neutral thing?
This has not cost us anything but our own peace at this point. So that's basically, and just because I say that jokingly, but also truthfully in the fact that we're looking at some of these old policies going, where is this coming from? So the biggest thing with it is again, we never printed our manual. Ours was just one big PDF. So it wouldn't cost us anything additional than what we've already paid for. The beauty of this, though, is that this year we have implemented a new learning system. How we all have to do the, stroke campaign thing or whatever, the HIPAA, as the law requires. So we implemented one of those, and within that new system, we have an incident reporting system, but we also have a policy and procedure system. And the beauty of this new system is it breaks it out, and assigns it to certain people. But we can also make commentary on the policies in real time. And so we can actually kind of pull a policy out of that system and say, this isn't working so well. We need to re-look at this. Now, we have not really put that system into place 100% right now. We just got the learning part done. And so we're working towards that, but that is the ideal.
That is so cool. Like, I immediately into my head, I thought crowdsourcing and democratization, right? Like two ideas that have like just wildly changed the way we live and function in our world. And, even as an employee I've been in multiple large health systems and like we've had those policy things, but I'm trying to think if I've ever felt agency and providing feedback to say this policy isn't working and here's why. Like, I think that is really clever and a really great approach. So, all right, sorry, you threw me for a loop there. Now I've got in all my head thinking about all this policy that I want to sort of send people notes off to. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I thought what we could do here for this last sort of session is I want to kind of ask two things. And one is sort of what's step one if I'm not doing this? Like, where do I start? What would you say is like, how do I just begin from your perspective? And then the second is, if my organization is not as passionate as me, but what might I be able to do? Or what recommendations might you have to like, get over the barrier, whether they be people or process? So where do I begin and how do I get over a barrier when it comes in front of me?
I would say begin, I mean, at the beginning. Somebody has to be there to say this isn't working. Like somebody has to be that catalyst. And then that person also has to make a team to say, and this sounds terrible, but you have to choose the right people for the team. Like not everyone can be on the team, and because it's not everyone who's going to understand the concept and things like that. We did open up to all of our entire agency, and it just so happened that the right people responded because we knew that that's what was going to happen. Um, this isn't an agency thing. This is a health equity thing. It started in our department, and we're making the changes for the rest of the organization, and that's something that's gonna be difficult. And I'll just tell you that right up front. We do have leaderships, of course, okay, and they're on board, but we're not 100% sure how much they're on board. And so that's kind of the thing. So when you're going about this, like the first thing you need to do is form this team or form this little group and actually do the work. Like there's no magic wand that's going to make this happen. Somebody just has to do it. The other thing is that you have to be prepared to fight some battles. Especially, we're not a huge organization, we're 200 people. We're a small, like we're a FQHC, and so our line to the top is a little bit shorter than probably a lot of folks, but that also could be problematic, because sometimes the top is a bit older and doesn't have the same ideologies as we do, and may not understand the concepts here. And so it may take us teaching them as well, or come and holding them accountable to what we need to do, and things of that nature. So, um, but yeah, it's ultimately step one is do the work, like just do it. And step two is really be prepared because you're gonna meet a lot of resistance, and it's not gonna be fun, and people's feelings are gonna get hurt, um, and people, it's yeah. But it's one of those things that we just have to say, you know what? At the end of the day, again, sometimes it's just this is the law, and that's the end of the day, So I forgot the other question. What was your second question? Sorry.
No, what you kind of hit both of them. It was where to start and what to do if you hit a barrier. I was hearing be prepared for them.
Well, and also if you hit a barrier, just you kind of have to just plow through it. Um, because sometimes you're going to have some casualties in this process. You really are. And I don't know what that's going to look like for us. But like you said earlier, we are going to have to hold people accountable to these procedures and policies. Um, and that be regardless of anyone, This, like we talked about, and I gave the example, this bathroom issue has become an issue where it's not an issue. We should not be gatekeeping restrooms. You know what I mean? Like that's something, and it's become more of an issue than it really needs to be. And it does not make a lot of sense other than to reframe it as this isn't really a bathroom issue. It's an issue of something else. And we need to get to the bottom of that. And figure out what that problem is. So
I just want to interject. I think last session, Patricia said the most amazing thing, and I wrote it down because I want to steal it. The only reason any of us have jobs is because people before us refuse to comply. And that is probably the most beautiful thing I've ever heard about a job or a position I've been in. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life. is be in positions where, you know, I got there because people before me didn't comply, and I want to continue that. So I think that's huge. Plow through it no matter what.
And in context, that was a quote about we work in HIV, and our ancestors have. I mean, the history of our struggle is the history of, you know, holding people accountable. So we already know how to do it. We just have to remember that sometimes it's not nice.
Yeah, and I think you can apply that to any racism or any, you know, anything we're facing, gender discrimination, you know, any of those laws in the workplace, any rights that we have. I think it was great. The quote was amazing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this frame, right, is like it feels like a war for, you know, the people on the other side. And when you go to war, I think sometimes in our health centers we try to put different language on that as if to make it sound like it's something that it's not. But in reality, people, I love, Patricia, when you said there will be casualties, right? These are barriers that have stood in our way for a very long time, that have been supported by the system and the people in it. It's been codified into our laws. And most of the time with barriers, we're like, oh, what are our facilitators? How do we overcome? How do I get my stakeholders? And I love what you said. Sometimes you're just gonna have to plow through this one. Like they're a little different than I think our traditional barriers that we face in healthcare. And I think you're right? It is somebody, I believe too, in our first session, you talked about somebody has to just be willing to stand up and say, no, like, this is not okay. This is not what we're supposed to be doing here. We've got 3 minutes left here. So I did want to say, first of all, thank you to both Patricio and Wendy for coming to share your experience with us. I can think of no better group of people to share with us how to move through policy than those who recognize the work of the people that came before us to create the space for us to have the privilege to continue to serve the people who society ignores for the most part. So thank you for all of the work that you do in your communities in that part of the country, and to everyone on the call with us today for all the work that you will do in your part of the country to bring about this kind of culture that we learned about today. So before we close down, Patricia, Wendy, any final thoughts?
My biggest thing is you know, we were talking specifically about a health equity lens, and one of the things that I think we get so caught up on with this language is what health equity really is. And we talk about social determinants of health being things like, you know, race or gender. The reality of the situation is those are not social determinants of health. The social determinants of health are racism and misogyny and those types of things. So we need to stop in putting the precipice of change on the people that we're applying this label to. You know, for example, African American women die at a higher rate of breast cancer than their white counterparts, even though the rate of breast cancer is not different. There's a reason there. And the social determinant of health, you know, everyone's like, oh, it's socioeconomic status and access. You're right. But it's also racism because African American women, Black women have historically been abused by the medical system. And so we also need to reframe the conversation around health equity while we do this work. And we need to be very real about what that is.
Beautiful. Absolutely. Wendy, any final thoughts?
Like Patricio had said, you always need somebody to stand up and say, no, that's not what we're doing. Be that person.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you both. Please communicate our respect back to your colleagues as well, doing this hard work back in the office. And we appreciate the early morning. We know in Hawaii it is early, and y'all were fighting morning traffic and internet and everything to get here. So we greatly value it, and we really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined us for the office hours today. We will have the slides and stuff available for folks. I know some people were requesting it. If people have additional questions, please feel free to reach out to your Escalate coaches and contacts, and they'll be able to put you in touch with the folks to answer your questions. So thank you again, everyone.